and welcome everyone. I'm going to say Happy New Year, as some of you I recognise, although I haven't yet said it to you. So great that you've joined the webinar, and as always, thank you for giving up your time, very precious time, to come and spend it with us over this next hour. For those of you who don't know me, my name's Matt Stevens. I'm the founder CEO of Impulse. We're an employee engagement company. I'll come on to that in a moment, but just want to start by saying really excited about today's webinar. We've got about 55 minutes because we always like to finish a little bit early to give you back a bit of time. There's going to be, I believe, really practical. I'm very excited about our two panelists who've joined today, and I'll come on and they can introduce themselves in a moment. But in our preparation for this, it's really been about how do we earth this in what's going on in businesses, in people's lives, in the things that we need to do to address the challenge of the wellbeing debt, and I'll explain that as we go along. So, yeah, thank you again for giving us your time, and we'll get straight on. For those of you who don't know anything about us, just a couple of points is we kind of now become a bit of a recognised authority, particularly around employee engagement. Not only do we have a fantastic platform, but we also do a lot of kind of the consultancy side. And you can see here we had a huge amount of articles published over the last 2 years, over 15 million views of coverage, and you can see some social shares there as well, and very much around what we were seeing going on. You see some of the headlines there through the pandemic, because with Impulse, we're the only company that focuses on emotions, and so we actually ask people how they're feeling and give them a range of emotions from negative to positive, and then we ask them why, alongside all the usual standard questions you'd expect when it comes to engagement. But we were taking a lot of that data and being asked to share it not only with our clients, but actually by some of these great names you see here. These are some of our clients, and I mentioned this more to say that gives us a perspective, so it allows us to sort of see what's going on across very global companies, and what's happening, what the trends, what's going on, and some of that we're going to bring today. And in a sense, really, this is where the phrase wellbeing debt came from, was me sort of in and out of all our different clients, working with the exec teams, some of the leadership, and I started to see that there was almost like this debt building, a bit like in our finances, or is that just me? Where sometimes, you know, you're not paying down, but you keep adding on more and more debt, and it felt like that when it came to wellbeing. I'll explain a bit more of that as we go. But as I say, I'm so excited to have with us today Anne Archer and Lee Chambers. So what I'm going to do is just take a couple of minutes and let them both introduce themselves, because I'll do it far better than I will. So Lee, do you want to go first and just tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining us for what's going to be a really engaging session. So I'm Lee Chambers. I'm a psychologist and wellbeing consultant and founder of Essentialised Workplace Wellbeing. And really what we do is a lot of our work surrounds helping SMEs to design wellbeing strategies and then delivering effective, really ultimately evidence-based wellbeing into their organisation, looking at ways it can be tailored and bespoke to different employee group needs, how it can be made more engaging through elements of story that are blended in with the evidence-based delivery, and really finding ways to then amplify and measure that. So obviously Impulse is a great way to get that benchmark and data that you can then use to build upon. But we also then look at how it can be embedded within communities and really looking at the psychological aspects of delivering the different pillars of wellbeing that are increasingly important, but also helping companies to intertwine diversity and inclusion strategy with wellbeing strategy to, I suppose, create a more inclusive and performance-related culture. You know, we do a lot of interesting work, got a range of clients across different sectors. We've been recognised and won a few awards recently, which has been, you know, really, I suppose, a testament to the work that we do. But if anything, it's the impact that we make with the clients and being able to see how they've moved, seeing employees really engage in wellbeing when sometimes they've been a little bit hesitant and not felt it's for them. And actually taking out the companies that we work with on a journey to really start to look at the well-being in terms of, have they got a debt? Can they address it? Is there ways that they can, you know, increase the income they're generating from well-being, ways they can save well-being costs, and really look at balancing and creating a strategic way to bring well-being forward that benefits both the business from a metrics perspective and the individual employees too.
Fantastic, thank you, Lee. And everyone listening, I hope that got you excited for what Lee's going to share, because in corporate land, it's all about the metrics and proving that these soft areas like engagement, well-being can actually make a material difference. So excited to hear more about that as we go through. And Anne, love you to introduce yourself too.
Yeah, of course. So up to 2007, I had a corporate career, going around the world, actually working in global organizations, and it was great, and I had a lot of fun while I was doing it. But around 2007, we were coming into a recession, and I started to feel really, I wanted some sort of change, because I was finding my question was about how can we create workplaces where people can thrive, because too many people weren't. And there was so much pressure on individuals from the system, from the organization, from the systems and the processes. And it just wasn't getting recognized that the impact that was having on individuals, on their performance, on their engagement, was quite significant. But it was a tension, and nobody was really talking about it. And that was sort of some 15 years ago, and I set up on my own. And what was really interesting is I started out with this question of how does the system and the individual come together in a way to create a thriving organization? Now, I didn't have the answers, and there weren't too many people talking about it, because this was 15 odd years ago, and it was sort of rumbling around. And I managed to find a couple of global clients who were willing to grapple with this over a period of time. And I did a master's in the psychology of well-being. So, similar to Lee, there's that sort of underpinning of understanding the mind in a way of, what really goes on.
Yeah.
And about 5 years ago, I became re-energized about this idea about how can we make the world of work a place where people can thrive, because I had a bundle of grandchildren appear, and they've sort of kept coming. And I've started to really think about the transitions, the changes, the way that we're evolving and not evolving, and what difference that's actually making. And currently my clients, so I'm working with it's really exciting because it's all metric, there's a lot to do with metrics. So there seems to be quite a strong theme there, where we're really looking at what is the impact of on individuals around what's happening in the system. So things like workforce planning, for example, if the system is piling up the pressure, but nothing's happened about it, it can really crush trust. Who's really paying attention to what's going on for us if actually the system is pushing and pushing and pushing against us being able to thrive? So I'll stop there, because there's lots of other things I could add in, but it's, we need to get into the conversation, really.
Definitely. But everyone listening, I hope you're feeling like I am. This is going to be a great conversation. We're going to try and keep it as very practical as we can. I need to just set out for you a little bit what we mean by the wellbeing debt and sort of how it interplays a little bit with engagement. So we're going to do that just for about 5-6 minutes. And I'd really encourage you to stay on right through to about 1 to 2, because both Anne and Lee are going to share their top 2 resources to help people skill up and tool up. So you don't want to miss that. You want to hear what they as experts are saying, what are the 2 key tools. That was the task I set them to say, can you bring that towards the end? And particularly about halfway through, we're going to be really getting into what do leaders, the exec leaders, what do line managers and what do employees need to think about when it comes to paying down the debt of well-being over the next period. And yes, just say to Lena, I've noticed on chat, we will be sending out the recording too, but that doesn't mean you're allowed to leave. Stay to that last 5 minutes, and
please.
We'll free well then. But yeah, the slides and the recording, as Lisa said, will all be sent out. So just getting into it, let's just set the scene. So why did Impulse, as an employee engagement experience platform and the company, get involved in wellbeing? Well, being honest, with what happened with the pandemic and the lockdown, we had all our clients, or a lot of them, coming to us saying, what the heck do we do? Do we keep, what do we measure? How do we come at this? And we came up with the wellbeing framework. We worked with actually one of our clients, Nuffield Health, some of their chief psychotherapists, as well as some external people, as you see here, Phil Martin, to really put together a framework around what to measure when it came to well-being. And the other thing we said is and this was being told to us by psychotherapists, you need to be measuring regularly. We're in a really, really uncertain, anxious, stressful period where you need to get more data more often. And so we saw clients who went from like once a year annual survey, those clients, right? Lovely, and we love them all, but they went from like once a year to doing 3 or 4 over a year to many doing once a week during that first lockdown, to then moving to about once a month and then once a quarter. So, and what's key in all of this is the trend data. So we were looking to see what's going on under these different elements of well-being, and it was absolutely fascinating. This is where a lot of our data came from that we shared and we put out into the wider world, because we wanted people to see what's going on with people. But as been said, and I want to be really clear, we're not experts when it comes to what then do you do. We've got ideas and we ask for opinions, but I'm thrilled to have Lee and Anne on, who both run organizations that are absolute experts, and at the end we'll make sure you've got their details too, so you can connect with them in your own way. So let's get into some of the kind of key stats and kind of just build the picture. Many of you don't need us to kind of tell you this because you've experienced it in your own workplaces. But as you can see, over the past year, 25% of UK employees feel as if they've hit a psychological breaking point. That's absolutely huge. And Anne and Lee, I'd love to get your views on some of these facts, whether this chimes with what you've seen over the last couple of years, just to really build the picture. But you can see here, 70% of organizations now recognizing they've got to focus on well-being and mental health, which is brilliant. It's a key part of well-being over the next year. And then I thought this was interesting. Around 40% of millennials and Gen Zs feel their employers have done a poor job of supporting their mental well-being during this period. That's a significant minority of people who are saying that. And so kind of that already starts to show you the debt that's building up here, that people are feeling really psychologically challenged. Companies are recognizing, gosh, we've got to focus on this. And actually, millennials and Gen Z, who, by the way, make up about 60% of the workforce now, it's pretty much everyone under about 40, 41, are saying, a really strong minority saying, we think companies haven't done a great job on this. So I'll start with Anne first. Any comments on this before we move on?
Yeah, I'm really troubled by 25% say psychological breaking point, because that psychological breaking point means they're done, you know, that they're not in work. So there's something really quite serious about that. How can we have people feeling like that in the workplace?
Yeah.
One of the things that really troubles me about the younger generation coming into the workplace, and I mentioned about grandchildren, you know, just seeing what that means. I do suicide prevention work, and sadly the suicide stats and thoughts of suicide in the younger people coming into work are going up. And so we're not at a place of, oh yes, sticking plasters. We're at a place of, you know, significant shifts, I think, are necessary.
And Anne, just leave that again for everyone listening, and many of you will be in a company, large or small. That's really important for you to kind of hear what Anne said about that generation coming through are much more susceptible, much more kind of, you know, that's happening more often. And so thinking about how we immediately, as a companies, help and support them in that, and particularly they're coming in a very still uncertain time.
Absolutely. And one thing to add to that is, and I was on a call this morning and it was coming up, where people have come into the workplace and never met people face to face.
Yeah.
They've come in expecting to have a global role where they're traveling, they're going in to see clients, they're doing exciting work, and that's not happened. And so there's been a number of factors that I think influence how that younger generation are feeling, that feeling of hope and confidence, and, you know, seeing a future when there've been a number of different real challenges right now.
This is very real. And Lee, I'd love to just get you, is this the reality? Is this chiming with the work you've been doing with companies and individuals?
Yeah, so honestly, Mike, it's very similar. What we're finding, especially with the younger generations, is there is a higher expectation due to the increased awareness. There's a lot of challenge and pushback against performative well-being, where it's being said to be done, but very little is happening behind the scenes. And very much like Annie alludes to, for that younger generation who have not had the chance to observe organizational culture in the same way, not had the ability to kind of learn from that environment, they're coming in again with a level of uncertainty, and everything is new and novel, which promotes interest, but also really pushes that tolerance psychologically, as everything is something that is, you know, either a challenge or a threat, depending on how they're able to frame it. And more than ever, employees are having to look at even some of the aspects around, you know, environmental and intellectual well-being, because that is a topic that, you know, especially for Gen Z, is coming up more and more as something that they want to honestly see companies delivering something strategically and being able to show exactly what they're doing. It's becoming very much the future talent acquisition beacon of being able to actually show and model great wellbeing behaviours and cultures within a business.
There you go, everyone. There's some great value bombs right there coming from Lee and Anne. I really like that phrase, performative well-being, because, you know, if I think back to pre-pandemic, and I'm being a little harsh here, but companies were talking about well-being in the same sort of breath as, hey, we give them duvet days. You remember duvet days? That was kind of the well-being. Hey, but we give everyone free coffee, so, you know, we're pretty good. And you look now and, you know, kind of like, wow, companies were getting away with that, which is very performative. Not all. Totally understand there's some really taking it seriously, but I would say would it be fair to say the pandemic has shifted companies' views of what well-being is? Sorry,
I would definitely say that companies have started to look and realize it's both a competitive advantage from a business perspective when done well. It's actually something that really glues people together, especially if they're working remote or hybrid. And it's actually, if done properly, a way to propagate a more positive, collaborative culture.
Yeah.
And I suppose, again, it's kind of changing what well-being actually means, and helping them see the different pillars that they can impact as a business and how they actually compound together if done well. Yeah. And I think that's where that kind of compounding ability to get the interest out of the debt has suddenly become quite compelling to businesses who are on the front foot looking to really do something that they can evolve and embed.
Yeah. And I love you just to comment on this, comment come in. I think employee expectations have risen too. They now know what good looks like. What's your thoughts on that? And then we'll move on.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think there is more conversation now, and also and to kind of give a slightly a different view as well. I think we also need to make sure that we don't create for ourselves a situation where we never expect people to battle through. Yeah. And we never expect people to, oh, actually, this is tough, but come on, I've got this. And there is a slight, I'm picking up just recently, a slight unease that we might lose some of that. I want to use the word grit and drive and perseverance, not from we've got to be tough and, you know, man up and get on with it, but just realistically, sometimes work is hard, and that's okay too. So just getting that balance right, I think. I agree with what you said, Lee. I'm just saying, I think there's just also a little orange flag there, just going, ooh, what about that?
I would say, Anne, that there's an element of challenge there around younger generations, generally speaking, having things quicker, and a quite an intergenerational communication challenge around expectations of being able to set those. And I think that conversation can actually open up that abundant space to actually see the process in play. And I think that sometimes when that's forgotten, it can be a real barrier to well-being.
Yeah, that's
gosh,
really
this is nice. I hate to interrupt because this is such a great call. I'm enjoying listening to the two of you riff. And I guess a couple of thoughts as you're saying. You're totally right about the word I was going to use was resilience. You know, and actually building resilience. And with three sons, all coming, one teenager and two coming right into the teenage years, I'm actually enjoying moments of failure, because it's only through the failure or what is perceived failure that I can sort of teach them, well, this is where we get resilient, right? This is where, you know, you can either go that way, and that I can understand that, but actually, how do we get you thinking about how do I respond to this in a way that's gonna build? But I think just Linda saying here, totally agree with Anne's points, a fine balance between helping employees and encouraging learned helplessness. Very good. Right, this is fantastic, loving this already. I want to get on and share a little bit of data again with you, because this was from our own surveys that we ran over 2020 and 2021 across a lot of companies, global. Average size is about 6,000 people. And here you can see immediately, if it stands out very clearly, that there's been a significant drop from 2020 to 2021. So it actually worsened. And this is kind of partly where I started to think about this well-being debt that's building. Because you can see the Wellbeing Index, which is effectively an amalgamation of, or an average of typically 4 or 5 questions from different perspectives of well-being, has dropped really significantly, about 15%, 8 percentage points, about 15%. And then work-life balance, again, hasn't dipped quite as much, but still it's around 10%. It's dropped there. And then if we look about, does my company care about well-being? Is well-being a priority here? Actually, interestingly, on the previous slide, it's saying 70% are going to do well-being more now. But employees in these companies are saying the opposite, saying, actually, I don't feel that over the worst possible year we probably had for a long time, the pandemic, that it was taken as seriously. So any comments you want to, is this your sort of sense from 2020 to 2021?
I think it's quite variable, Matt. I think they're really interesting. It's really interesting data. I think always well-being can be influenced by external factors as well as what's going on internally. So I'd love to interrogate the data now, more to understand what is actually being said. But one thing I'd like to pick up on this work-life balance that has come up over and over again with employees, with managers, with leaders, is that while people are working in the home environment, that the transition between home and work is very blurred and there's less of a boundary. So where somebody might go and do a half-hour podcast as they make their way home and kind of switch off and then feel that they're now in a different environment, those kind of transition states aren't happening. And the other thing, because people can sit at a screen all day, they're losing that sense of becoming Zoom shaped. They're just sort of getting stuck and losing that getting up, moving around, talking to people and those sorts of things. So yeah, I can understand them to one level, but then as with all data, I'd want to
go under. You want to get under the skin of it.
I do.
We will share that with you. We'll share that with you. Lee, I just want to get your views on this. Joe's just written in and said, incorporating resilience training is essential for the new generation coming through into work. I think we'd all agree on that. But leaders and performance managers should take responsibility for this and measure outcomes. Any thoughts on that, how you measure the outcomes and who should take responsibility for it?
Yeah, so I think from that perspective of being able to help people get a bit of a handle on resilience, both in terms of how it can be utilised in a more expressive way, because quite often it's when I'm talking to younger people, the word has come into the world over the past 5 years and has become vocabulary, it's become a buzzword in some places. But what I find is there's still a kind of struggle to understand about the suppressive elements of it, around this robustness, around this lack of being able to express emotion. And it's a fine balance, because some of the younger generation are very, very articulate at expressing emotion. And when it comes to that ability to be resilient and look at the different ways to navigate what could be considered failure, mistakes and errors, find the learning opportunities and be able to find a way to actually measure that to show that is something that can be built as a skill. Because so often it's kind of seen as an outcome, and helping younger people to be able to see the progress they're making in that as a competency in their ability to continue to bounce back from the challenges, to see challenges as things they can grow into, things they can step into. I think it's a generator of confidence in the younger generations, and being able to see that journey metrically, especially when it's being kind of delivered in a almost a coaching capacity, really helps younger people to actually see that they are becoming, more promotive of it.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting. I like that perspective of actually the measuring is really useful for the person themselves going through it, as well as for the company, who obviously get a benefit to see that the budget they set for that was worthwhile and valuable. But actually, the employee gets a benefit. Anna, anything you want to add?
Yes, absolutely. Because I'm working at the moment with a global tech giant who I'm not going to name. It wouldn't be appropriate. And this is exactly what we're working on right now in the moment, is how can we generate an organization that is resilient. Resilience for me is the adaptability to change without a decrease in well-being. So that's just, like a soundbite. One of the challenges about measurement is coming up with the leaders and the managers. It's twofold. On one hand, if we don't measure it, it doesn't get done. So if it's not in my metrics to do stuff about well-being and my priorities are stacked, I'm not going to put it right at the top of the tree. But on the other hand, take away the pressure and just let me learn and grow and learn and understand how to have these conversations about emotions and stumble around a bit in the dark because I don't really know what I'm doing. That takes the pressure off. So that's a really interesting tension. So sometimes whilst metrics might be kind of helpful because they track, the very fact that you're measuring people who perhaps themselves are feeling a little bit, it can create a tension, or it can mean it's not getting prioritized unless they're measured. So it's quite, it's not straightforward.
No, totally. And interesting, Linda came in with a similar-ish definition as you did there. She said, Linda says, I try to promote the idea that resilience is not about keeping going regardless, it's about adapting to changing circumstances.
Perfect.
And I think I captured you, I've maybe got this wrong. Resilience is adapting to change without impact on well-being.
Yeah, without a loss of well-being, ideally. So, yeah.
Great. I'm going to move us on. And everyone listening, we're about 5 minutes away from getting into some very practical tips for how do we help execs think about what they need to do from a well-being perspective. Because I get asked this all the time, execs saying, well, what do we do? Well-being is coming up again in the survey as being really negative and low and people really struggling. Then line managers go, what, I'm not an expert. I don't know what to do. And then, of course, employees themselves, how do we help them? So we're about 5 minutes from that. Just a couple of other bits I want to put out around kind of the context. And what we're seeing is, this was quite a surprise for us, although it was also covered by or seen by other survey providers out there. We weren't alone in this. So there was actually normally there's a link between employee engagement and well-being. So well-being more specific around the factors I showed earlier, and employee engagement more around relationship with line manager, sense of purpose, etc. And typically they correlate very, very closely, and they each sort of influence one another. But in 2020, we really did see them disconnect from one another. Engagement increased by about 3 percentage points overall as we looked at all our sort of companies and clients when we took out the outliers. And actually, well-being, as I've already shown, decreased by about 8 percentage points. So it's quite one went up and one went down, when typically you'd expect them to kind of follow one another because they're so correlated. And we actually, before we joined here, Lee, Anne and I were talking about this, and they said, do we have any views on why this was? And what seemed to be coming out from the free text responses was employees feeling connected to their work and sort of aligned, if you like, with their job, their role. But actually there was suddenly, and Anne, you referenced this earlier, they were suddenly confronted with, but I'm always on Zoom, but I'm now working remotely. Well, now I'm homeschooling. Well, now I'm a frontline worker and I'm actually very, very concerned about my health. And like, I never had to think about fear when I was going to work. I just got on the tube, I got on the bus, I got in my car, but now I'm actually very worried. And so that for us seemed to be what was coming out, people saying this well-being's gone off in this direction, whereas my sort of more classically engagement side is still doing quite well. In fact, actually, for a lot of companies, they felt, for a lot of employees, they felt their companies responded well. So I just wondered, for the two of you, either of you want to comment on this?
I think your reference to the NHS or to frontline workers, it certainly resonates with me, because I do quite a bit with people that have been working on COVID wards or cancer specialists, and some real challenges there in terms of their passion and their love and their connection with the work that they do, and a huge desire to make a difference to people's lives in that moment. Yeah. But the fatigue and the level of exhaustion is enormous. And then that's kind of coupled with a feeling of this is a health service and I don't feel that my health is being looked after. So it's really quite a challenge, but everything you've said there. And the other thing is, you mentioned fear, and it's not just fear, I think, about your health, but also fear of finances. Fear of what's happening. So I've got to stay at work, I've got to keep going, and I've got to show up, I've got to be present, but holding that anxiety and fear, which then throws up anxiety as a potential mental health condition.
And just to clarify, really, for frontline workers on our surveys are typically transport. So they're working for, like a rail or a bus company, and also a lot of construction companies are within our sort of. So that, again, they were saying very similar.
Yeah, absolutely.
Lee, anything you want to make before I move us on?
Yeah, I just think quickly, from my perspective, a lot of the employees that I've spoken to have been happy with how the business has become a bit more flexible to their needs, has adapted and acclimatized and found ways to maintain good communication with them and keep, elements of culture and social well-being going throughout the pandemic. So they feel grateful for that. But their expectations of health and well-being, given the wider public health challenges, seem to have increased. And therefore, if provision hasn't increased or developed, people are actually scoring lower. And also there's elements around them being more hyper aware of the health, given everything that's happening. And I think that means as well that people's reported well-being, especially with the variety of other stressors and uncertainty in the wider environment is meaning that people are scoring lower when they self-report well-being.
Yeah, that's a very, very good point. So Denise, don't worry, we're coming to your question, but just before we do, let me just sum this up then. So what is this well-being debt? Well, I kind of put it as, it's our biggest concern is that many employees have already hit or approaching a breaking point that leads to burnout and some long-term consequences. So actually, if organizations fail to engage employees and fend off the chronically high levels of anxiety, stress, and worry, we're seeing just even within our surveys, let alone the ONS and many other huge surveys going on, the result could adversely affect millions. We're talking, millions and millions of people here. So there's no doubt we've got a long road ahead to recovery. And the key now is, so how do we find ways of paying down this well-being debt that's built up in many companies and many employees' lives, especially as we take on these new challenges and we've got hybrid working, re-entering the workplace that we've already started to revert to. So let me actually take the first Denise question, which is a nice, good, wide question to sort of start us with. Denise said, what in your view are the biggest challenges for organizations trying to promote effective well-being? So I'm going to come to you first, Anne.
Yeah, okay. So first and foremost, it really makes a difference if the leadership of the organization engage fully. So not a lip service engagement. And that can be quite challenging, because if the leaders are thinking about how do we keep this company alive, because actually we're really struggling with whatever might be going on, that can be really challenging. But if a leadership pay lip service and say, yes, this is really important, but their very actions and behaviors are suggesting something completely different, that will have a big consequence. So I think where leaders can become engaged and think about the capacity of the organization, the readiness of the organization to approach and look at well-being in a holistic way, that can start to build trust. So it's not, let's put a lot of sticking plasters. It's saying, look, we recognize we've got an issue, so let's address it holistically, strategically, bring it really into the organization in a healthy way. That's probably where I'd start.
And unfortunately, having been around, as we all have, corporate life for a while, that's one of the biggest challenges for corporates is leaders not just going in one session, in one exec meeting, going, yeah, that sounds good, let's get on with it. Anyway, we've got 1,000 other things to think about, and it kind of never really gets embedded or brought to life or happens. So I think I can see that being a really big challenge of them really take it seriously and being activists, if you like, which again is very Gen Z millennial. They want activism, not just
or even honesty and saying, look, this is our capacity at the moment is absolutely stretched, and here's how we can engage. But it's back to that trust. What we can't afford is to break down trust at the start of something big.
Lee.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest ones from my perspective is making well-being something that's tangible. And often speaking to HR directors, people directors, and generally quite often the most passionate people who really connect with well-being on a deep level, they often state there's challenges around capacity, around them securing the budgets necessary to put a longer term sustainable plan in place. And quite often, again, that leadership modeling well-being behaviours is, like Anne said, is increasingly important, because people are more likely to follow the messenger rather than the message. And I so often find that from that HR perspective, they're sometimes not given the resource themselves to actually implement what's needed to be implemented. And that then doesn't really give the ability to engage the employees in becoming part of it as well. Because I think that more now there's that level of awareness around well-being, there also has to be some of that kind of push and pull between authority of health behaviours for employees and also them being willing to participate and engage at a level that actually then becomes beneficial to them, and starting to find, I suppose, more innovative ways to engage those who are less likely to engage just due to the kind of the value sets and how they believe they, turn up in the workplace.
Yeah, no, very, very good. So we're going to come on in just a moment to Anne and Lee sharing with us what their practical ideas are to you to go back into your workplace and support your exec handling and dealing with well-being. So we'll do that in a moment. But just before we do, I had a really good point raised around, from the conversation, it sounds like the wellbeing debt is focused on the younger generation. Do we have any data points on the mid-career and late career generation? So I'd love to hear from the two of you on what you're seeing with the older generation. One thing I will say is we do have one very significant data point, which came out, I think it was yesterday, which is 500,000 over 60s left the workplace in the last 18 months. So it's hard to read into why, but you know, it wouldn't take a stretch to go, you know, with all the things going on in the wellbeing challenge, 500,000 over 60s chose to leave the workplace and not stay in it, which is, by the way, why there's some challenge as well with recruitment, because we just lost 500,000, that's in the UK, lost 500,000 workers, which is massive. But so either of you got, I'll go to Lee first this time. Any thoughts on this older generation and the wellbeing challenge?
I definitely think there's an interesting kind of perspective as they started to develop their own awareness around these concepts that are, you know, still relatively new and evolving. One of the things that I see as being a real high generator of debt is losing talented women in the workforce due to menopause, and the lack of support, lack of normalized conversation, lack of general education in the workplace of what to be able to, you know, look out for and ways to be able to actually support those who are struggling, because it's something that's absolutely guaranteed for, you know, 51% of the workforce, and it impacts 100% of businesses. And from my perspective, as I've been moving around, you know, differing clients, there's very little support there. And, you know, it's those women who are so often incredibly talented, have climbed and scaled a lot of barriers in their own career, and then are finding challenges around that, you know, gendered health perspective of wellbeing strategies that's not being accommodated. And I think for the wider, you know, later generation as well, they have so much skill and so much experience, and yet are hitting that kind of period where, you know, there are potential chronic health challenges. And again, it's kind of highlighting that awareness. And I think that the debt has built up. And if we're going to look to be able to, you know, start to address that compounding interest, it actually hits older employees in a different way. And I think that compounding debt over time gets to a point where it actually becomes untenable for some employees.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, very, very powerful actually, made around, while some of the older generation may have worked hard to kind of get the resilience and work on some of that, some of the things that maybe from a well-being perspective are challenging the younger generations, actually some of the older generations have some more specific challenges. So Anne, let me come to you. Any thoughts on that?
I can't give stats and data in a sort of measurable sense, but a lot of my exec coaching clients are mid-career and late career, and increasingly over the last number of years, but particularly in the last couple of years, I would say the significant majority are trying to embrace the changes, but actually finding it quite different because it's not their identity. So it's not how they've grown up, it's not how they've been successful, it's not how they've done things. So when it comes to bringing about changes and looking at doing things in a different way, if everything you've learned to this point is about doing it this way, but we're now asking you to look in a completely different direction, and then coupled with that is a stress of resourcing where people are leaving and they are saying, you know, that back to the younger generation saying, I'm just not putting up with this. But if you're there trying to manage that and resource that and not really knowing what to do, coupled with having your own children perhaps struggling or, you know, fighting back too, it actually can be quite a lonely place, because it's not often a place where you talk. And in the organizations I work in, that generation, not so much the mid-career, but certainly the later career, they tend to be males. So there's a lot of stuff shifting around at the moment.
Yeah, no, very good. So what I'd love to, we've got about 15 minutes left. So thank you everyone for staying on. We've kept really high retention, almost everyone who joined has stayed. So thank you. And credit to the two of you for really stimulating conversation. I really want to get into, and I can see there's some questions, don't worry, I will come to those. But for everyone listening, I'd love to, what practical idea or advice could you give them to, if they're going to go back and talk to executive or talk to their senior manager, who's then going to talk to executive and go, look, we've got to take wellbeing this year, or we know you want to take wellbeing seriously. Let's start with the positive. What should execs be thinking about doing when it comes to wellbeing? I know you've already given a couple of examples, but anything you could share to help people listening. I'm going to come to Anne first this time.
Yeah, of course. So I use a very simple framing, which helps to open up the conversation. And I think conversations are really what can shift things. And the first thing is to actually ask about a state of readiness. How ready do we feel we are to whatever, you know, and you make up the question yourself. Then there's something about see it. What are we seeing? What are we noticing? So it's your data points, it's your tracking, it's you know, what's going on that we're noticing that's informing us. And then it's about understanding and what meaning can we make of what we're seeing, and what impact might that have. And so really sort of really working out what's going on here, and going under the stones with your questions with confidence, and then asking the question, so how can we optimize this? You know, how can we really get that fantastic balance between the organization thriving and the clients and the context for the organization and the employees? And if you ask those, if you have those four kind of areas, you can use those as a bit of a template.
Well, Anne, thank you for sharing that. For me personally, I thought it was brilliant. I was furiously writing that down. I hope everyone captured it. And if you didn't, make sure you listen back when we send out the recording, because I think having those kind of frameworks say, look, actually, there is a way for us to work through this conversation. And it starts with, as you said, what's our state of readiness? Where are we? Are we really ready to go at this? Are we really ready to commit resource to this? And then onwards from there. So Lee, follow that.
Yeah, I mean, how do I follow that? I think probably working in quite a similar way. What I find is getting a company to a place of kind of defining why, getting an understanding of why, and then looking at what outcome would they actually desire. Because I think when it comes to well-being, it's quite fragmented, and so often everyone has a different perspective and consideration of what it is. Yeah. I then think in terms of the actual ability to look at it in terms of people and process, because from what I see from my work, a considerable amount of the kind of well-being challenge actually surrounds workload, clarity of role, and appreciation and autonomy for role. And those are not necessarily things that can be delivered directly through, say, well-being support, but actually things that were, different sections of a business and process can actually look at how things can be made more efficient. Yeah. And that, then can take some of the resistance and effectively take some of the compounding debt out of the system for then well-being to be effectively built on top of. Yeah. So in that kind of area of actually defining outcomes creates a certain level of kind of engagement in the process, and then sees, okay, so from the data we've got, how useful is it? And then kind of looking almost at, I suppose, a level of gap analysis. What can we potentially do with the budget that we have and the resource that we have? And it takes away the argument of we don't have enough. Yes. Because it can actually see just a few small things documented well can actually start to make that difference.
Yeah, and Lee, I think that's a very powerful point about, sometimes to use the phrase, people think we've got to boil the ocean, we've got to do everything all at once, and actually let's start with the basics and let's start at the beginning, and that means start small. What I love is, while we're having this hopefully very beneficial conversation to all of you, our people who are listening, our participants are also connecting, which is brilliant. So Kay, Hansi has asked, very interesting, we've started to look into menopausal support. That was something, Lee, you referenced, but very early days. I'd love to connect with any organisation that has support mechanisms in place. So, Kay, well done for jumping in and offering some support there. And I'm sure both Lee and Anne, that maybe is something you can support, and we'll, as I say, share your details at the end. But really pleased that participants are also connecting and sharing information. That's exactly what we want. So great to see that community working. So we've looked at exec. Let's move in our last 10 minutes. And as I say, we're coming down to what the two key tools that we want to leave everyone with. And don't forget, I haven't forgotten some of the questions, but I'd love just to find out how do we help line managers? So people on the front line dealing with their teams, the small teams who are facing up to and challenging lean into well-being this year. So I'm going to start with Lee this time.
Yeah, so I think so often when I'm kind of doing the work that I do with my clients, management capability is so often seen as a barrier to well-being. And yet, if you can actually foster a positive development around that, really starts to look at management being equipped with some, some base level tools, but also starting to consider their ability to be maybe a little bit more coaching in their management style, really kind of opens up that ability for employees to benefit from some of the kind of intellectual well-being benefits that actually come from having those developmental conversations. And from a manager's perspective, so often, they are in a position where sometimes they're struggling for capacity to be able to really give the time that they want. And I think, again, it comes down to looking at that process and people and seeing, do they have the clarity to be able to support their teams in the way that they want, and really helping them to understand sometimes the different and variance of people, and communication and trust are massive in that position, and an ability to generate that little bit of autonomy and appreciation. I find that if a manager can show a little bit of appreciation and give a little bit of positive and constructive feedback, that reported well-being goes up, quite considerably.
Yeah, I think Lee, that's a really interesting point around actually is the line manager supported as well. Something you sort of threw in there. Almost start rather with what have you got to do, line manager? What have we got to do to help you, line manager, as you prepare to look at well-being? Anne, what are your thoughts on this?
That's really where I'd come in. So I'm thinking about this global tech firm that I'm working with at the moment, where we decided to start. So the leadership agreed that their capacity was not on point for them to actually engage fully, but they were overt about it. So we then worked with the entire sort of global manager force and equipped them, first of all, to understand where they were with their own resilience. So what could they do? So building their capacity and their capability so that then they had the resources themselves, and also a form of language that could then be shared with their teams. Now, what we're underpinning that with is some work around the teams getting a kind of fundamentals of resilience. So the language in the organization makes it much easier for people to have those conversations. But all those things about the line managers learning about those coaching skills. But the one that I'd absolutely say that we've really sort of picked up on is the ability to listen without judgment. Because if a line manager can hear what their teams are saying and really hear what the challenges are, they're so much better placed then to have a conversation about what you can do about it. So it would be resourcing the line managers so they feel that they can role model, and role modeling doesn't always mean saying I'm great at this, I've got it nailed. It might be saying I'm really having a bad day today, so what I'm going to do is but then the listening without judgment instead of fixing and advising and telling people what to do, which I know managers do because they're fixers, right? But in this context, it's not the best thing to do always.
Well, that's often how they've been trained and developed is
Absolutely.
To speak more and listen less is typically what they've been taught. But I love that as well. I think you've brought a lot of colour, a lot of richness to what Lee started to set out around looking at line manager, then you've gone into as well. Around where are they at with their own resilience, their own well-being, and that lovely phrase, listen without judgment, which I hope everyone is writing down and will be stealing with pride as they go back to talk to their own people about. We need to learn how to listen without pride. So I'm just going to pause for a moment and come to a couple of questions. So as I say, I love to see all the participants getting involved and helping one another. Lee, you sparked a whole piece with.
Yeah, you see, that's great.
So well done. That's obviously something that's in vital need, and people require. So great. Also, just looking at the Q&A, Melissa said, similarly, re-age and well-being question. Do we know what the well-being debt is for those with visible, non-visible disabilities? Is it worse? It feels like it must be. Is there data to show what this might look like? And do you know of any examples of organisations tackling this specifically? So I'll open that up to either of you first to start.
I couldn't speak to it. Let me just read the question again.
So it's basically, do we know what the wellbeing is for those with visible, non-visible disabilities?
Yeah.
So has it impacted them more the last couple of years, potentially? Has it had a greater impact? Is it worse? And
I personally don't have the data. I just know that, particularly around mental health, that we know that for people that have a mental health challenge that's not visible, we always know, and it's always been the case, that stigma makes it very difficult. But I couldn't comment with any credibility. It would be just an opinion, I think.
Yeah, the only information that I have is having looked at how the pandemic and the psychological stresses of something that's a public health crisis has had on people who have disabilities, and the I suppose the lack of access to services, and a lack of accessibility to certain aspects. Obviously, some things have become slightly easier for certain people with disabilities due to, I suppose, the liberation of being able to work in different environments, but the psychological stresses are much higher, up to 4 times higher for people with disabilities during a period of public health crisis. So there's definitely been some significant struggles for people with disabilities over the past 2 years.
Okay, well, look, Melissa, my commitment is I'm going to ask the team to cut the data via disabilities, because we quite a lot of clients do ask those questions, so we can cut the data on wellbeing through that segment, and we'll come back to you. So someone will be in touch. Don't worry, and see what comes out through that. Like, we've got 2 minutes left, so everyone's kept on board. Everyone's stayed with us. So we're looking now for these 2 fantastic tools that you would recommend. One, of course, is both of your organisations, which I'm going to shamelessly plug because I think you're both amazing, and I really want everyone to connect with you when it comes to wellbeing. But Anne, why don't you start us off with your 2 tools?
Yeah, so I think the first thing to say would be, I always work with a really simple mantra, which is, it comes about STEM-C, which is sleep, think, eat, move, connect. Because we know that sleep makes a massive difference to well-being, mental health, physical health, thinking, learning how to think well, breaking out of thinking distortions, having that realistic optimism. We know that what we eat, how we eat, when we eat can make a really big difference to how we feel about ourselves. Movement, not just every 3 times a week doing our 150 minutes, but actually regular movement. And a little fun fact here is high intensity, getting up the heart rate will last for 2 hours afterwards to stimulate the brain. So, that's sort of, and connecting with ourselves, mind and body in context, with each other, with our communities, with our world. Connection is massive, absolutely massive.
And that's fantastic. I hope everyone captured that: sleep, think, eat, movement,
move, and
connecting.
connect.
Yeah, absolutely brilliant. Really, really value that. I think that's fantastic. Just put into an organisation, really simple, really effective, and actually
most people know, Matt. Most people can tell you what needs to go in there. We just need to help them to do it.
Common sense, common practice. Totally agree. We all know it. We just don't do it. So Lee, over to you to bring us into land. What's your tools you want to share?
Yeah, I think one of them is the structure around the pillars of wellbeing. And from an organisational perspective, looking at wellbeing and realising that they interconnect and intersect more than we tend to believe. So I tend to work from a framework of 6 pillars: physical, mental, emotional, financial, social, and intellectual. And how they complement each other is something that your strategy should look at, as well as having your strategy intersect your strategy around diversity, equity, and inclusion, because well-being is intersectional. And there is a level of well-being privilege that is becoming more and more apparent as we look at, both of those strands from through a magnifying glass, really, and seeing how they intersect within an organisation. And if I'm to throw an extra little thing in terms of cognitive diversity and how it impacts teams' performance and well-being, I'd suggest having a read of Rebel Ideas by Matthew Syed.
Yes.
And I will be maybe slightly biased because I was on his podcast at the end of last year. So
yeah, great book. I really enjoyed it. Just on your wellbeing privilege, I was thinking of the very senior civil servant who said at the end of last year, "I'm not going back into the office. I rather enjoy going on my Peloton every day." And he thought, okay, yeah, there we go. It just leaves me to thank both of our panelists today. Lee and Anne, you've been absolutely amazing. I really, really appreciate you giving up your time to be here and to share your wisdom, your experience, your journey. It's been incredibly insightful and valuable. So thank you. And look at all the chat and the questions. I think, it's been great that people have participated. Hopefully something. So I'm going to have Lucy, but just say thank you, Lee. Thank you, Anne, for all you've contributed.